Testemunho.
Hello, hello.
Really? One of the students, there was another one. British, British. So the girlfriend of one of the instructors.
But I'm okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll begin our session now. Glad to see you all here. I know many of us went through circles until we finally got here. Congratulations on getting the venue. My name is Bridget Mugambe. For those of you who do not know me, I work with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Those who might not know AFSA, AFSA is the largest civil society in Africa. We have a membership of 35 organizations, mainly networks, and our reach is up to 200 million Africans or people who stay within Africa. Yes, to introduce our session today, we have a two-in-one. Our session will mainly focus on building an African food policy for sustainable and resilient food systems. But as part of the session, we'll also launch one of the key materials that AFSA has developed, a barefoot guide that has a showcase of different adaptation stories, how communities are adapting to climate change. And these are both advocacy stories, but also testimonies that we can use and share widely. They are stories from Africa. Before we begin, I know we'll not have an opportunity to do self-introductions, but I'll just recognize two people. One, the Honorable Member of Parliament from Uganda, Mrs. Kaya Christine Nachimwero, you're welcome. We are honored to have you here. I would also like to recognize Mr. Fred Kabanga, who is a negotiator with the African Group of Negotiators on Agriculture. He's also from Uganda. We are delighted to have you here, and other colleagues in your different capacities. You're all welcome. Briefly, we'll have three panelists to begin off the agenda. Then later we'll invite Honorable Christine to come in and guide us in the launch of the Barefoot Guide. To give you a brief introduction of this session, the climate crisis is having a significant impact on agriculture, food production, and food systems in Africa. And current African policy solutions are putting additional pressure on small-scale food producers to adapt industrial agriculture initiatives such as climate-smart agriculture, GMO seeds, and fossil fuel-based chemical inputs. Agroecology, on the other hand, is a people-centered sustainable agriculture system and social justice movement led by farmers and local food systems, and which AFSA is promoting. So this session aims to provide a forum for discussion about the process that has been initiated by the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in collaboration with the African Union to develop an African food policy. So we'll share that with you, the progress and how we feel it can address the failure of the African food systems. To start off our session, I will invite Dr. Million Belai to give a brief introduction of AFSA, but also take us through the process of developing the African food systems and why an African food systems. I'll briefly introduce Million as this presentation comes on. If you could kindly put it up. Dr. Belai has been working for over 2 decades on intergenerational learning of bioculture, diversity, agriculture, the rights of local communities to seed and food sovereignty and food and forest issues. He has a PhD in environmental learning, a Master's of Science in Tourism and Conservation, and a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. And he is a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food. Dr. Belai is the General Coordinator of AFSA. So Million, you're welcome to take the floor. If you could take us through the African food policy process and why the need for an African food policy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure if it was not for the confusion, we would have had a lot of people. It's a conversation about food policy. I just wanted to take you back to history, a little bit of history. Why did we start this food policy work? As Bridget said, I'm a member of the International Panel of Experts on the Sustainability of Food, with which we are convening this session. And there was an initiative from IPES Food to develop a European food policy. They called it a common food policy, European common food policy. So I was part of that actively, actually, in that process. So a thought came to some of us, you know, if Europe is developing a food policy, why not African? Not copying how they did it or the elements of their discussion, whatever, but starting from analyzing our problem and synthesizing our problem and bringing our solutions. And in 2018, the AFSA group have accepted this process, and from 2018 on, we started to work on this process, and it's becoming one of the most important and exciting work of AFSA, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Okay, so the goal at the end of the day is to have sustainable and healthy diets. What do we mean by that? These are dietary patterns that promote all dimensions of individual health and well-being, have low environmental pressure impact, are accessible, affordable, safe, and equitable, and are culturally acceptable. These are all important elements: environmental pressure impact, accessibility, affordability, safe, and equitable, and in our context, cultural acceptable or culturally appropriate food system. That's very much important. This is what we want to see in Africa, and this is what we're not seeing in Africa. The International Panel of Experts did research, and these 4 problems were identified in general on our food system: a triple burden of malnutrition, hunger and micronutrient deficiencies, obesities, and non-communicable diseases, NCDs, cardiovascular, respiratory cancer, and diabetes. Everybody knows that these are becoming increasingly problematic in Africa. In diabetes, for example, Africa is the highest incidence in one of the continents where there is the highest incidence of obesity, and cardiovascular cancer is increasing in Africa hugely, and that's related to food. Environmental and sustainability related to our food system, we all know about that. The biodiversity loss and the pollutions, especially the greenhouse gas emissions. And social inequities, poverty, disempowerment, and neglect of cultural values. All this exists in Africa, and it's a crisis. What's happening? So when we talk about food policy, what do we mean? What do we mean? The food we eat in the food system we enjoy are shared by a variety of distinct and disparate policy frameworks. All these: agriculture, food safety, public health, nutrition, trade, environment protection, climate and energy, economic and social cohesion, rural development, international development, employment, education. All of these affect our food policy, our food, I mean. So there has to be coherence among all these policies. If there is no coherence among all these policies, then we don't have a good food policy. So the goal of this program that we are doing, which is called an African food policy, is to have a healthy and sustainable diets for Africa. What is the aim? We have identified 5 aims to challenge the current approach to food policy making in Africa. What is the current approach? Mostly a policy development in Africa is externally driven. It's consultants who are developing our policy. It doesn't, it's not participatory, meaning that the people do not participate in policy making. That's what we wanted to change, basically. So the challenge, to challenge the current approach to food policy making in Africa, to articulate a vision of the kind of food system that we need in Africa and how it can be realized. To articulate a vision of the kind of food systems we need in Africa and how it can be realized. So we don't have at the country level and also at the regional level in Africa. Hello. Do you hear me? Okay.
Check.
Hello? Yes. To articulate a vision of the kind of food system we need in Africa. What is our vision for our food system? We don't have a vision. I'm saying this in confidence because we did research in 23 African countries. And also we have looked at the policy, all the policies related to food at the African Union level. We don't have a vision. And how it can be realized, the how is very, very problematic, as you know. And to lay out coherent and interconnected policy proposals that could be included in national food and farming policy, coherent and interconnected. I've detailed, the kind of policies that are existing or institutions that are existing, but there is no coherent among them. So one of the purposes is to lay out coherent interconnected policy proposals and to provide a framework to organize, campaign, and lobby around transforming our food system in Africa. And to continue, oh my God, to continue to build the foundation and pillars of a food movement in Africa, which people from across the food system collectively engage with and shape. By the way, we are almost onto this one. As you may have heard, we have launched a campaign which is called My Food is African. We have even launched a book to help us guide our policy process. My Food is African. That project is launched in 13 African countries now, and the number of countries will continue as we get more resources. My Food is African, which works at two sides, policy development and mobilizing the civil society in Africa. My Food is African. So that's happening. So, as I said, there were decisions by AFSA. In 2008, we had a food system conference. So we have decided to work on that, and we have developed a roadmap in 2019. We started working with the African Union Commission, the FAO, and WFP in 2020 during the COVID period. And we did research, comprehensive research on all the policies that exist in Africa in collaboration with the African Union. And that was critiqued 3 times. And we had an expert meeting in Addis Ababa. And they came, experts from all over Africa, and they looked at the research, and they have given us a direction. And we started food dialogues in 23 African countries. We collected all those research, and we synthesized and produced a book out of that. We have hired a consultant at the AU to help us in relationship with the AU. Then we produced a roadmap. In December 2021, last year, at the end of December 2021, we identified the critical issues that we have to campaign for. And we have started to deepen our work. And that's what is the My Food is African campaign. So these are the countries where the research was done. And so we included Tunisia. The Tunisian study has included like a review of the policies of Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt. So whatever we are proposing is a voice of African people, as you can see. So as a result, at the end of this campaign, we are expecting that the EU develops an African food policy framework. We are working on that with the African Union. And country-level food policies are adopted by the cabinet and the parliament. That's why having the honorable parliamentarian here is very much important. And the STC, the technical committee, we hope that they will endorse the African policy. And we are hoping, and we are working with a number of African governments, including Uganda, to propose this food policy at the AU level. That's the strategy, the two-pronged strategy, working with the AU and at the countries also proposing an African food policy. And African Union cannot say no if a country proposes. So, as an interim, this is my last slide, Bridget. The intermediate outcomes are, we are continuing to do research, so further evidence will be generated. We are expecting a declaration of support by some key stakeholders. We will establish a network of expert champions and key actors. That's going to happen next year. We're going to do that. Mobilize the energized civil society and actors. Yes, that's going to happening. And at the end of this month also, we have a big convening in Cameroon, where we will bring so many actors together to fulfill this four purpose. And documented actions taken by policymakers and actors. So we will document their actions. So these are the activities: regional multi-stakeholder convening, strategic meetings, country-level dialogues, capacity enhancement, media engagement, which is very much important. By the way, we are working with at least 50 journalists all over Africa now. Wherever we go, we are bringing journalists. In the meeting that we had last time on climate, 15 journalists were part of our meeting. So we're working with journalists and advocacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Million, for that overview. Million has, is it on? Thank you. Yes, Million has given us an overview at the continental level. So now I would request Wilberforce to just give a country a view of the process, how it has happened, the African food policy process at the national level before Karen comes in. As Wilberforce's presentation comes on, I'll just briefly introduce him. Wilberforce is the Deputy Executive Director for Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Organization Development. He's a Ghanaian and a social scientist. He holds an MA in Governance and Sustainable Development from University of Cape Coast. He holds a diploma. He trained as an agriculturalist. In addition to his function as Deputy Executive Director, Wilberforce is the Programs Director of CICOD in Southern Ghana. He's facilitated trainings on for traditional authorities in local and management of natural resources. His bio is quite long, but I'll now give him the floor. If you can take 7 minutes, Wilberforce, to take us briefly through the process at the national level in Ghana.
How many
Welcome.
minutes?
7.
7. Forget about this one. Okay, so what we did in Ghana was to review, we engaged a consultant to look at the policies that we had in the country. And then we reviewed the policies that we had. So the desk review of the policies, and then we also had national consultations, brought together various stakeholders to look at the food policy, the work of the consultant. And then we also used the Google Forms to elicit more information on what the public, the general public, wants to have in the policy. And then we finally did some validation workshops on that. So yeah, the national policy dialogues. We realized that the food policies in Ghana are more in the agri sector. The Ministry of Agriculture is responsible for fashioning out the policies. But we also realized that they've come out with a lot of policies, but they are all stand-alone policies. They are not, coordinated in any way. The policies were not speaking to each other, And so we realized that we have the FASDEP document, we have the food nutrition policy, we also have the food safety policy. And all these policies are standalone. They are not integrated in any way. So we realize that all the policies have objectives, but those objectives are not talking to each other. So one of the challenges we realized was that even though those policies are not coordinated in any way, the enforcement was a big issue. The policies are there are no enforcement, and then so they stand alone. They don't achieve much, Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. So the key findings from the research, from the engagements, was that there's a lack of coherent food policy in the country. And we have a number of legislations, but like I said, enforcement is a challenge. The policies are led or driven mainly by the agricultural sector. And then we have the informal and the formal sector. But they realize that the informal food sector dominates the food systems in Ghana. So then the meeting came out with some recommendations. We need to develop a coherent food policy. I remember we brought stakeholders from government, the Food and Drugs Authority, the Standards Authority. We also brought the Food Research Institute. And then they say that, look, we have developed the policy. We don't understand what is going on. But then we realized that at the end of the day, it was the food safety policy was looking more at the handling issues. It's not looking at the production issues. No wonder we passed the GMO bill, because Agric is looking at production. It's not looking at the health aspect. So we are looking at the food policy that is addressing all the various aspects of it. We know it's an uphill task, but fortunately, we have brought together the coders from government, from civil society, and they are beginning to dialogue, they are beginning to talk. And then we also realized that the Ministry of Food and Agriculture should lead the development of the policy. And also like I said, all the relevant stakeholders must be brought on board, because we realized that it was not very extensive. And at the end of the day, we should also enforce whatever policy that we bring on. So we want to broaden the platform as our next set of activity. We also create a continuous platform for engagement. And then we want to use this process to develop a citizens-led Ghana food policy. So not one that is coming from the top, but one that's coming from below. And so a state and non-state actors want to bring them together to begin to engage more. And then, of course, hold validation meetings to ensure that the concerns of people are addressed. And then also, we will then work towards finalizing the Ghana food policy. And then we think that after we have done all that, we should get some what do you call level of, go ahead. So after we have developed the policy in country, fortunately we have the ECOWAS sub-region and we have a desk. So we want to see how we can give these, the country can submit the policy to the ECOWAS Secretariat and then onwards to the Africa level. So at the end of the day, we expect that in country we'll have a national food policy, and then this document will be shared with the ECOWAS and the African region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Willie, for that presentation. Wilberforce has given us a country case of how they have gone through developing, trying to move towards developing a national food policy. I know that you've also made a lot of efforts to engage with the ECOWAS. So I think at some point you will share on that if we have some time. I think it's critical for us also to make that link, to see how you're making that link between the national level, but also making efforts to interact with the ECOWAS and ensure that it gets to the regional level. So thank you so much for that. But we will give you an opportunity at some point to also speak about that link with the ECOWAS and the efforts to promote agroecology with the ECOWAS. Thank you for that. Yes, now I'll invite Karen to share experiences from Kenya, not necessarily the national food policy development process, but to speak about the work they have been doing in Kenya with the county governments, trying to address the food systems challenges that we are facing in this climate crisis. I'll briefly introduce Karen. She also has a very long bio, about 4 pages, but I'll summarize it. Karen Nekesa Samkoya was born in an indigenous community in Western Kenya. She's naturally passionate about culture and nature. She's an activist, a campaigner, a social worker, a change maker, and a result-oriented communicator. As a communicator by practice, she's a community mobilizer and a campaigner by experience, a public speaker by action, with a lot of relevant advocacy and interpersonal communication skills. Karen has quite a number of other attributes that I will not speak to right now, but she's been in civil society for a number of years. She's also a board member of several organizations, including Pelham Kenya, where she has served, and BIBA. Karen, you're welcome. Please take the floor.
Let me try this mic. Hi. Hi, good morning. Yes, thank you, Bridget. My name is Karen Nekesa, as Bridget has just said, but it's important to tell you that I also work for an organization that transitions children, young children in schools into agroecology. And what we encourage is use of natural available resources. And that's what we are doing, not only in Kenya, but in countries like Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. So I'm very, very much privileged to be here to share our experiences on the work that we have been doing. When we talk about food, food is very much complicated issue, especially in Africa, and especially in times of drought and very harsh conditions on issues of climate crisis. So we have conducted a research in Kenya through the Agroecology for Climate Action campaign that has been supported by AFSA, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, on climate legislations in Kenya. But also we are in several countries, and I want to speak this on behalf of the Climate Change Working Group of AFSA, because I'm the co-chair. We are working in about 11 African countries, and after we developed the national policy, we were able to do a regional policy to check what is the main reasons and issues that Africans are facing when it comes to food. And I want to also say that we all know that food is a human rights issue, and every person has a right to food. So what comes in as we work, as we do our work at the local level, all the way to the national level and intercontinental through the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, there has been issues of seed. And for me, seed is life. It actually represents life. If our seed is wrong, then our food system is wrong. So what we are doing is to try and encourage, and through capacity building, community dialogues, to be able to educate young children all the way to the vulnerable communities in arid and semi-arid areas on how they can easily adapt to climate change. And that's the reason, again, we are going to launch a book today called The Barefoot Guide to Climate Change. It's actually not a change now, we are talking about crisis. And in the Barefoot Guide, it's also about an emergency. In Kenya, where I came from, there's lots of issues. There's drought, people are dying. And when they die, it's because they've lacked food. We have been to schools as a Kenyan team, and some children go to school on an empty stomach. It's because their parents do not access the land. And when I say accessing land, what we have observed, those who do not access land are women who suffer the most climatical conditions issues. So when they go to school, we've had testimonies from schools that children, instead of following classes, and of course also our education system is quite a bit challenging, they sleep in class. There's a head teacher actually who told me that, one time he was on parade and one child just collapsed. And when they gave him a cup of milk and bread, he revived. So food is a human rights issue, and we should be talking about it severally. So the other issue I want to raise, and what we have really also observed, is the issue of recognizing the smallholder farmers, the African farmers who are custodians of indigenous knowledge. And in our work to transitioning to agroecology in our country, Kenya specifically, but also to the other African countries that are doing the campaign, we are also looking at the indigenous knowledge. Different communities have different ways of dealing with climate conditions. And for the seed, if we lose the seed, then which are adaptive to the climatic conditions depending on national circumstances, then that really becomes an issue. So that's one thing And the best we are doing, and we have seen now with the work that we are doing, is that most communities now are able to save their indigenous seed for the next planting season. And for me, I think I grew up with my grandmother, and I could see her when she wants to plant seed, she would get seed next to the fire, hanged, the way she preserved the seed. Then she would tell me, this is good for planting, this is not good for planting, this we will eat, this we will sell. But now we have moved into cash crops that we're also now making all our land into cash crop farming. So what happens next? We lack the food. But remember this, with the issue of industrialization, commercialization, when we sell all the food, we don't have any. And actually, some of them, for cash crops, we are given subsidies on fertilizers, the seed is for free. So by the time a community member is harvesting the food, or a farmer, smallholder farmer is harvesting the food, he or she is not even able to have any to eat. So what happens? You sell all the food, then go and buy it at a higher price. It is very sad that we are seeing this. And then converting our land into, use of so much chemical fertilizer. This has happened. I say this with a lot of pain because now I come from Kenya, and the lift to ban, lifting the ban to GMO is an issue. And all these issues are because of some of our interests. We know them, we should hold them accountable. So why should we be here at the COP27 and people are not being held accountable? We are all here as Africans. We are all here to represent our communities. So that's another issue that we really need to support each other, coordinate ourselves to support African countries that are really promoting the genetically modified organisms. We have environmental and health issues that come about when we do that. And so our role is also actually to look at the ecological issues and challenges that such foods will bring into our African countries. Of course, I say this also because smallholder farmers, small-scale farmers, feed about 2/3 of the population in this world. So they need to be respected. And with the work we have been doing, of course, I know in most African countries, again, the issue of seed is power. And so who are powerful here? For us, in Kenya, the women are powerful because they are custodians of seed. And for me, I really push for recognizing their tireless effort into preserving seed and keeping seed, and so saving it for the next planting season. So they're able to use the indigenous knowledge to know when to plant and what type of crop grows where. Now with the climate conditions, I know all of you know that there are crops, food crops that could grow even without us planting them. Naturally, God has created everything and gives us enough. So now we are losing them because of the chemical fertilizer use. So I really want to say that let's not allow ourselves to suffer, but transform the agri-food system, build resilience, and enable small-scale farmers, pastoralists, of course, and fisher folks to adapt to climate change, including agroecology in the UNFCCC. That's the reason we are COP27, decisions in agriculture. And this offers a clear adaptation benefits and go benefits when addressing food insecurity and impacts on climate crisis. So I want to finish by saying one thing. Let's also focus on reversing degraded land into productive land. I'm saying this out of experience because most of our schools, especially the community, I work with schools, their land are left bare. They have nothing to do about them, or they have no idea, or they know, but they're ignorant. But when we began doing the work we are doing with schools, we were able to reverse an area that you would not imagine could be productive. So let's reverse such community land, especially public land, and through schools to enable our children feed and also participate in feeding the children through the government programs that we have in our different countries. It is my expectation that we all come out of SHAM with a roadmap to transition to agroecology, and agroecology that uses naturally adaptable resources in our different countries. And therefore we need to do more and scale up natural farming approaches and call on all of us to work together. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for that passionate contribution and for all the good work that you're doing in Kenya. Yes, before we get into the audience interactions, I think I'll just immediately invite the Honorable Member of Parliament from Uganda, Mrs. Christine Nachimwero Kaya. Yes, I was about to ask Wilberforce to go down because men have been up there for so long. So thank you for for saying that. Yeah, it's fine. Yes, Honorable Christine Nachimwero Kaya is a Ugandan politician and a legislator and woman representative for Chiboga district in the 11th Parliament of Uganda. One thing I also know about Honorable Christine is even before she became a member of Parliament, she was very strong on supporting agroecology, and civil society was really, really delighted to have her joining Parliament. She's continuing to do a lot of good work as a member of the Climate Change Committee in Parliament. Christine, please do feel free to introduce yourself further. I'm sure there's something I've left out, and please give your remarks for about 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I am Christine Kaya, as introduced. I'm a woman member of Parliament. You know, you can be any member, but being a woman member is special. Thanks to Global Alliance for the Future of Food, because it is the organization that sponsored me here. I'm very, very grateful. And to all the partners that collect funds into the basket. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. And like I've said, I'm a member of Parliament. I'm an environmentalist by profession. And in Parliament, I belong to the Climate Change Committee and also the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. And I'm also the Shadow Minister for Water and Environment. I belong to the opposition party in Uganda. And I also chair the Uganda Parliamentarians Land Management Forum. It was after some recommendation of the IPCC report that we needed to focus on land tenure security in order to practice some of the approved technologies for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And that is why I was like, no, we have to have a voluntary platform where members deliberate extensively on land security. So I am very grateful to be here. I thank you for recognizing Parliament as an institution that can really add something. For all the COPs, Parliament has always been put on task to help put the respective countries on target. But when we come to real helping Parliament to put countries on target, there are specific activities that we need to engage in. And I'm really happy that the members here and the Alliance is moving on target as far as helping Parliament is concerned. When we talk about food, we should put it at a certain level. It is a primary need. It is a basic need. It is survival. It is the minimum requirement somebody needs. And so when we categorize human rights, food is not a secondary human right. It should be taken as a primary survival issue. So the attention you have to give to food must be somewhere extra. Because all the rest, I remember when I was still an agriculture extensionist, is the day we gave farmers improved the seed of maize. And instead of planting, they washed it and ate it. And yet we thought this was the maize variety that would grow faster, would actually adapt to the little rains. What did we see? Nothing. They ate all the maize. So if we don't first address the issue of food, then all the approved practices cannot be implemented. Who will implement them? The population will have died already. So we need to categorize the human rights And food, to me, is very important. I still thank you for prioritizing food in your day-to-day work. I am aware we are going to also launch the barefoot guide. And I was looking at the definition of barefoot guide as well. Yeah? Moving with no shoes, zero budget agriculture. The simplest, the most vulnerable, the poorest can all go for this guide and achieve something. When we are addressing issues of emergency, we also need to change the way we do things. Because the way you address an emergency issue, climate change has become an emergency, then the way we prepare for emergency, the way we respond to emergencies, the way we recover areas that have gone through emergencies must be different. And so what are we doing right now? In our role as members of parliament, budgetary allocations to response is key. Concentrating on early actions, because we have already come up with research that if we don't spend $1 on response, then we are bound to spend $15. I mean, if we don't spend $1 on early actions, we are going to spend $15 on response. But how many of our countries have that money? We do not have that money. So parliaments, members of parliament need to remind the governments that, you know, let's invest the $1 in early action in order for us to have the food. Now, also food has a supply chain. Food has a supply chain which we need also to concentrate on. When you look at the production part of food, look at the post-harvest part of it, look at the value addition, look at the marketing. Where are you? Where are you? Because we need to know where we really belong. How do we contribute the food supply chain? And we must separate ourselves in these groups because every step is very important. In Uganda, I'm lucky. I can eat fresh from the garden. What about somebody in Germany? So somebody working on value addition on the food that I produce in Uganda is also very, very important. So the entire supply chain must come out and we must find ways, find the points that we contribute to. So when we look at the barefoot minimum guide, there are some, actions that we also need to remember and emphasize and try to remind the populace that we represent. The perception, some of the perceptions for parliament by many of the people are funny. Some people think parliament will be deliberating inside there in plenary, and that is it, in the premise, and that is it. So it is like, I have a petition. How will it be heard on the floor? Where are the members of parliament? And you think we stop at that. You remember our experiences? How do we get the votes? Is there anybody who has started gender relations than any politician? You cannot get the vote unless you have started the gender relations in your community. So we traversed the community. Actually, we are aware of every natural resources in our constituencies. We are aware of the communities that at least have food in our communities. When there is a challenge, especially on our crops, food crops, pests, diseases, a member of parliament will get the first-hand information. Actually, the re-affected farmer will first call a member of parliament. I am here, I have nothing to eat. You tell those people that this one has befallen us. So, if we have that mandate, and if we have the will, then how do other stakeholders tap into that potential to ensure that we encourage our people to produce food in the best ways, in the simplest ways, sustainably? We do not want to have months of, food plenty and then months of going hungry. How can that be? when we have nice weather for some of our countries. So we need to change the perceptions we have about parliament. When we have the representation role, what are you going to present on the floor of parliament? It is you who give us what to say. Sometimes now like I've come here, I'm getting a lot of concepts. And so my deliberations are not going to be the same as a member of parliament who is not here. If, for example, they called on all of us to say something about agroecology, we shall have a difference. So representation also calls on us to look for information, to look for best working alternatives. We are policy makers, yes. We formulate laws, we review policies and guidelines and laws, but what is best, what is working well elsewhere? We still have to relate with you in order to know what is working elsewhere before I put some of those provisions in the policy, or before I make a decision to approve a policy or an act. So we request that you change the perceptions you have about parliament such that all the 4 roles, representation, oversight, legislation, budgetary allocation, all come out clearly in a member of parliament, but fronting our agroecology concepts and food production concepts. That is when we, parliament, shall add on something. So some of those good concepts in agroecology, I'm very happy about it, about the concept and the methodology. Because look at planting trees, what is wrong with that? Coming up with bylaws. Because this one does not need to wait for a member of parliament, civil society, and all stakeholders can spark the actions leading to that. And then protecting the resources we have, eco-based adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptation, because we were made differently. Agroecology recognizes the uniqueness in what we have. For example, may all have mountains, but your mountain may be porous, may be supporting agriculture, mine doesn't. It faces a lot of landslides. Mine may have river catchments, yours may not have. So the uniqueness in adapting to climate change must be recognized by all of us. You don't take your Zambian or Ghanaian responses straight to Uganda. Somehow they may not work because these ecosystems are different. And then the gender relations are also different. In Uganda, we have had landslides. Every time we have landslides, we lose people. But you wonder, there was early focused and people were informed. Why is it that we still lose people? It's because of some ties. Oh, I know the landslide will occur, but my ancestral burial place is here. I can't leave them here. I know, but where you're telling to go, where you're telling me to go is a dry place. I can't go there. So there are a lot of ties and relations that affect us. And then healing the land. We have a tendency of focusing on a lot of climate change effects. But when we talk about food production, my colleagues talked already about seed, very important. How about fertility of the land? Many of our governments have forgotten investment in fertilizers, in the fertility. Wherever they talk about climate change effects, the reduced soil fertility is forgotten. Yet this is very key in food production. And farmers will keep telling you, my grandfather used to plant white beans here. I can no longer plant them here. What is the meaning of that? We remember food is identity. We are sometimes identified by the food we produce and the food we eat. So if we lose it, then the identity is already lost. If we identified by white beans, and 10 years from now they are no longer white beans, what shall we be identified with? Others are struggling and struggling to have seed banks, safeguarding their seed systems in order to remain with their identity, in order for their grandchildren to find identity and also carry it on. I don't know how many minutes I have now. But we need to learn and adopt and adapt. Because if we, there is a tendency also of I have grown, I can't change anything. We just have to raise that mentality from our hearts, from our brains, from our heads. The way we think must be different. At any one point, even the moment you are still alive, just subject yourself to change. Be ready to change. I would not be a politician. I used to just be like, hallelujah, praise God. We are civil society. We just things like that. I didn't have politics in my head, but I realized that we needed to have some of our brains in parliament to feed, to close the gap. For we need to bring that language of agroecology in parliament. We used to see other professions going over there. And for us, we are few. Many of us are stuck in the civil society and these other platforms. And yet the other one is the final decision-making table. And so if we do not take part in both, then we may lose some of the actions. So if you appreciate that we are in a climate crisis, what does it mean? What does it mean to you? How do you feel the crisis in your area? The definition must come out clearly. That is when we shall come up with the best mechanisms to help retain our food system. Extreme weather, is it there?
Christine, sorry. if you can
Okay,
wrap up.
so I am still privileged to be here, and I am just trying to remind you that barefoot minimum guide is for us all to adopt as advocates, as extensionists, as practitioners. And so there's no excuse for not doing anything as far as agroecology is concerned, because it even recognizes those who are on barefoot, those who are going for zero budget agriculture. They are still welcome and accommodated in this concept. I pray that we take it on for our people to have the basic need of food. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kaya, a Member of Parliament from Uganda. She's always so passionate about civil society, about agroecology, and about gender and climate issues. Thank you so much for ably representing us in Parliament. I would just like to give the audience an opportunity, about 2-3 people, if there are any questions. Please have a question mark at the end of your intervention. Let's keep it brief so that we can also launch the guide and finish with this session. Please put a question mark at the end of your intervention, I request, and keep it 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, Bridget, and I wish to use this opportunity and thank our Honorable Member of Parliament for her brilliant presentation. I just have one question for her. Considering that you are a woman, and considering that you are a member of the Parliament, and considering that you are from a small-scale farming community, and now is the time that we discuss budget in the Parliament, what have you done to convince your colleagues to see that there is a budget allocation for agroecology? Thank you.
Thank you. What is the second answer? Okay, Yeah. Please put a question mark at the end of your intervention.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Mane Nanyu from Pelham, Kenya. Thank you, our presenter. I think this is the way to go for food policy. Mine is a recommendation that as we work on this food policy, can you also try to incorporate the issue of land access and ownership for women? Because land is a critical factor of production, and women who are great producers in Africa do not have access to it. And this is one of the limiting factors to food production. Number 2, the issue of food waste. can we also look at the issue of food waste in this food policy? Because you find sometimes in like our country in Kenya, you find other places pouring milk, others throwing their potatoes, and the other far end of the country, people are dying of hunger. So there's need to come up with a way in which we can be able to have distributed food across the whole country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Clear recommendations. Josiah, please 1 minute.
Thank you. My question is to Honorable. I appreciate more.
Please introduce yourself briefly.
I'm Joshua Aruna from DR Congo, Congo Kinshasa. So it is a like suggestion to AFSA and partner. I saw that Honorable has a great experience that could be shared with other parliament within African country. I would like to suggest that if we can think how to make together all parliament, women parliament, to meet and to exchange about how they can move forward about African policy on African food. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Are you raising your hand or briefly, please? Yeah, you need to.
Thank you. And my name is Precious Piri from Regeneration International. I wanted to really thank the Honorable for her intervention, but also ask a question on, as we are here, what opportunities are you seeing to use your voice strongly as one of the policy makers, just both here at the COP and in the African continent, especially back home in your region? I was so moved by your intervention. So thank you.
The first question was on what have I done? When we joined Parliament, you were requested to decide which committees you should belong to. It is a voluntary selection. And to me, my first requests were all granted. I requested to be on 2 committees. 1, environment and natural resources. 2, climate change. Every member must belong to 2 committees. So first of all, my decision to belong to those relevant committees, I think, is one of the actions I felt is very important for me to move the rest of the parliament. Then, budgeting. When we are deliberating in those committees, actually, those are the committees that are supposed to allocate funds, deliberate on budget related to natural resources. So under that, we supervise the Water and Environment Ministry and then the Energy and Minerals Ministry. So still the ministries that we appropriate are in line with food. So that is the other thing we are doing. But I also encourage officials from the relevant departments and committees to come and interface with Parliament. I always mobilize for them members of Parliament to talk to show the need, prioritization of the actions. We have the National Meteorological Authority. I've ever organized for them, to meet with some members and, show the necessity, the need for us to have serious budgets on our issues. And then also, we have the Climate Change Forum. It was a voluntary forum where many members could belong. But because of our strong deliberations, it became a standing committee, a formal committee in Parliament in 2019. So in Parliament, having a standing committee on climate change, yet we also had the Natural Resources Committee. We feel we have given nice services to our Parliament to deliberate on these issues. Then some other colleague was requesting us to include land tenure security. I told you this year in April, we launched the Parliamentarians Land Management Forum. specifically to address land tenure issues. And we feel this is when people can practice all the approved technologies and practices. Without tenure security, we are still also casting words in the air. Thank you for observing that. And then capacity building of other members of parliament. Very many parliaments have come to Uganda and we have taken them through on how we run climate change issues. But I would be glad for AFSA to take me to other country parliaments to build their capacity as well. We need climate change committees in the respective parliaments. We need them and they should be strong. And then we are addressing food as a basic necessity, like I said. So somebody was asking, what are we doing globally, especially while we are here, to influence globally the allocation of funds and attention to food? Members, I am also calling on you as you go out under loss and damage. When we request for interventions on food, we are not demanding for secondary human rights. We should stand by the support by enabling simple financial instruments to enable acquire food. So under loss and damage, under compensation that we're talking about, we need food, we need survival. That is what we are moving on, up and down, deliberating on. Thank you so much. Those are some of my.
Thank you so much, Christine. I will invite Million to have last word. We have a few minutes left on food waste, then we'll launch the Barefoot Guide. Thank you for being a good audience as I hand over to Million to conclude this session and we launch the guide.
Thank you very much. It was thank you so much. Do you want to say something? Okay. Okay, thanks a lot. It was a fantastic session. By the way, food waste is important. It's an increasing problem in Africa, but also much more important is also the food waste, the food loss in Africa. Some countries lose more than 35% of the food that they produce. If we could manage to have a mechanism of saving all that food, which we are losing, I think we could go a long distance. Thank you. That's the only thing that I would say.
Thank you, Million. In the remaining 2 minutes, I will invite Ms. Aisha too, AFSA board member and the Honorable Member of Parliament and my panelists to come here and just launch the Barefoot Guide in the best way you see it fit. For those who are not here, as they organize themselves, the Barefoot Guide is an AFSA publication that shares stories of climate adaptation from local communities. Tomorrow, we will have it at our exhibition, stall 38, right? Yeah, stall 38, and please do feel free to visit and pick copies. Thank you so much. As a moderator, I'll also join.